Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. This is video number 7 in our review and refutation of the book by Mr. Kyle Pope entitled Thinking About AD 70. The book is produced by Truth Publications, pardon me, out of Athens, Alabama, and so it's available on the internet, obviously. Now, before we get into, video number 7 here, I want to remind you, Preterist Pilgrim Weekend is going on right now. All right? Now, we're not doing live streaming as we've done in the past. Each of our speakers has videotaped their presentation. Each of the lessons is now posted on our website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Thanks to the marvelous work of organizing everything, that work of organizing done by Alan Morton, my fantastic webmaster. It's there. It's easy. All you have to do is go there, click on the banner. You can pick out what lessons that you want to listen to. Just this morning, I was looking at some of the responses. The initial lessons were available last night, and so the response has already been very, very good. We have speakers such as Al Pershawn, my good friend from Australia, Scott Fisher, Larry Siegel, and on it goes. And I apologize, I'm not trying to leave out anybody because we really do have a fantastic lineup of speakers. It's some great, great material. And like I said, the response has already been good. I wasn't trying to give an exhaustive list of our speakers, but you're going to find it very, very helpful. The theme of our Preterist Pilgrim Weekend, and the beauty of doing it like we have, is that you can go back and listen and watch the videos anytime you want. I had an individual call me last night and say, well, I'm not going to be able to watch as the videos are there. Can I go back and watch later? And I said, they're archived. You can go watch them anytime you want. That's the beauty of it. And let me say one more time that if you can help us at all with the expenses that we incur in doing this, we pay our speakers just exactly as if we had brought them in on airplanes and put them in a hotel and what have you. We've had a few of you step up and send us some very generous contributions. Unfortunately, it hasn't covered the total cost of having these speakers present their presentations. So if you can do anything at all to help us out, to defray the cost of doing Preterist Pilgrim Weekend, we would really, really appreciate it. I've gotten emails from a few of you that said, I'm going to send you some money to help out. Haven't gotten that yet. Just a gentle reminder here. So please keep us in your mind, keep us in your prayers, keep us in your support so that we can continue to bring such marvelous events to you, even though it's, electronic. Okay, like I said, this is video number 7 in our review and response to Mr. Kyle Pope's book. And most of what I've said so far deals with the issue of the passing of the law of Moses. And why is that? And by the way, let me make notice here. In the very near future, you can tell my voice is getting better, still awfully weak. But as soon as I get the full strength of my voice back, or to the point that I feel comfortable doing it, I'm going to begin doing a rather lengthy video, DVD series, on the passing of the law of Moses. Now, we're going to do this one of two ways. We're going to do it both ways. We're going to do it by subscription basis. In other words, as I complete a DVD and it's ready for release, you can subscribe to that particular lesson. You can subscribe to one lesson, or you can subscribe to all of them. All right? Or you can wait until they're all done, and you can order the DVD, the entire set. And I can tell you right now, it's going to be somewhat lengthy. And I think by the time that I'm finished, Lord willing, and I have the time to do it, all right, you are going to see, maybe for the first time ever, the incredible importance of understanding that the law of Moses was not nailed to the cross. We're going to be dealing with that extensively, the argument that it was nailed to the cross. And I'm going to be showing you why this issue of when the law of Moses ended is so critical for a proper understanding of biblical eschatology. I'm going to hint at that right now as we continue our study and examination of the book by Mr. Kyle Pope, Thinking About 8070. Keep in mind that fundamental to Mr. Pope's entire theology is the view that the law was nailed to the cross. Now, let me remind you, Mr. Pope says in his book, if a law or a covenant has been abrogated, annulled, taken out of the way, it is no longer applicable. Well, that is so axiomatic, that is so undeniable. I don't have to quote any law on that. You know it's true. I know it's true. So, if it is true, and it is, that if a law or covenant has been abrogated, it's no longer applicable, then consider the following. If it is true that the Old Testament foretold the end of the world, as Mr. Kyle Pope affirms that it does, then it must be true that the Old Testament will remain valid until the end of the world. Because after all, you cannot have a prediction of the end of the world unfulfilled until that time and claim that the Old Testament is not valid. The Old Testament would remain valid until it was all fulfilled. That's what Jesus said in Matthew 5:17 and 18. And Mr. Kyle Pope takes a rather unique, I would say idiosyncratic view of what Jesus meant when he said that all the law and all the prophets had to be fulfilled. Mr. Pope says, in essence, no, the law and the prophets did not have to be actually fulfilled. I'm just summarizing here. Did not actually have to be fulfilled, did not have to take place, come to realization. All that was really necessary was for Jesus to fulfill the, how do I put this, the spirit of the Old Testament. And I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that absolutely will not work. It backfires extremely powerfully against Mr. Pope. But to continue, let me reiterate this argument. If a law or covenant has been abrogated, no longer applicable. Mr. Kyle Pope says the Old Testament foretold the end of time, the destruction of material creation. Therefore, according to Mr. Kyle Pope, the Old Testament remains valid until the end of time. Now remember, Jesus said the law and the prophets. So, you can't dichotomize between the law and the prophets. We'll have more to say about that later. And in my book, The End of the Law, the Torah to tell us, the passing of the law of Moses, I have an extensive discussion demonstrating that the law prophesied, prophecy was the law. Therefore, when Jesus said, not one jot or one tittle shall pass from the law, it meant that all prophecy had to be fulfilled. So, get a copy of my book. And by the way, during Preterist Pilgrim Weekend, we got some fantastic specials, okay? From today all the way through the month of August. Preterist Pilgrim Weekend special is if you order over $25 worth of material, books, DVDs, MP3s, whatever, over $25 of material, we will give you a 15% discount plus free shipping. Now, folks, look, this is fantastic. It really honestly is, so take advantage of it. be sure to get this book and another one or two for over $25. Okay, got to get into this. Here we are already 10 minutes into my presentation today. Mr. Kyle Pope talks about heaven and earth. And he says, well, preterists always define heaven and earth as Old Covenant Israel. Well, first of all, I don't know of any preterist that says that all references to heaven and earth refer to Old Covenant Israel. That's a generalization that is really not fair by Mr. Pope. But secondly, Mr. Pope makes the argument, please catch the power of this, as I pointed out last week. He makes the argument that the Old Testament predicted the end of material creation. Remember what I just said? If the law or covenant has been abrogated, it's no longer applicable. And yet here, on page 32 and following, Mr. Pope affirms that the Old Testament foretold the end of the physical universe. Therefore, I'm sorry if this is repetition, this is important. Therefore, the Old Testament remains valid until the end of the material universe. Well, he takes us on page 34 under the heading, Examples of Apocalyptic and Cosmological Language. And he says, preterists offer various Old Testament prophecies that they affirm demonstrate figurative descriptions of judgment upon various nations. These include judgments on Babylon, Isaiah 13, Israel, Isaiah 24, Egypt, Ezekiel 30 to 32, Edom, Isaiah 34, 4 to 5, and Nineveh, Nahum, chapter 1, verses 1 to 5. We actually agree with some of their conclusions that these are figurative in nature. Where we must differ with them is in their conclusion that these passages demand we interpret all New Testament prophecies figuratively. I'm just going to drop this little hermeneutical question in your lap for you to consider. When a New Testament writer quotes, cites, alludes to an Old Testament prophecy that is demonstrably figurative, metaphoric, non-literal, how are we to interpret the New Testament text? Are we to interpret it literally? I mean, after all, it was metaphoric back here. So what would be the hermeneutical principle for saying, oh that's a figurative, metaphoric text, but over here it has to be interpreted literally. What is the hermeneutic? I've been asking that question for years and years and years. I asked a professor at Harding University that question years ago after he gave a marvelous presentation on 2 Peter chapter 3. But he stopped short. He said, all of this language about the destruction of heaven and earth, all of this language of the Lord coming on the clouds, all of this language of coming on the clouds with a shout and trumpet, we have to understand that in the Old Testament is metaphoric, non-literal. After the lesson, I went up to him and I said, I want to commend you on the lesson. That's fantastic. But let me ask you the question. If a New Testament writer quotes from an Old Testament passage that is obviously metaphoric and figurative, non-literal, how are we supposed to interpret the New Testament text? And he stood there with the proverbial deer in the headlight look, as if I had hit him upside the head with a 2x4, and he said, that's an incredible question. I don't know how to answer that question. He said, what's your application? I said, well, my application is you just gave us some really, really good pointers on 2 Peter chapter 3. But I said, I'm sure you're aware that 2 Peter chapter 3 is quoting from Isaiah 34. It's quoting from Isaiah chapter 13, passages which you've just told us are metaphoric. And he goes, I see what you mean. I don't have an answer for that. I've got to go back and study. Well, you can't ask for anything better than that. But I want you to notice that Mr. Pope says, I actually agree that we have these Old Testament passages that are figurative, that are non-literal in nature. But that doesn't mean that's the way they're used in the New Testament. Well, if the New Testament's drawing on them, then why not? Secondly, he says, in Isaiah 13, we find a prophecy against Babylon. Her judgment is prefaced with the warning, wail, for the day of the Lord is at hand. This is describing a day of divine judgment, but it declares, behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate. He will destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of the heaven and the constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth. The sun will not cause its light to shine. I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. He, that is Isaiah, continues, therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth will move out of her place, the wrath of the Lord of hosts in the day of his fierce anger. Mr. Pope then queries, is this a literal description of what would happen in the Lord's judgment of Babylon? Yes and no. Yes, they would experience wrath and become desolate. But the physical earth continued, the sun and moon continued to shine, and the stars did not fall. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you will seldom see a more glaring example of petitio principii, presuppositional hermeneutic, at work. He knows this is a judgment on Babylon. He knows that Babylon fell in the 6th century BC. He knows that it fell at the hands of the Chaldeans, ultimately, 531, approximately, BC. But what does he do? He says, well, yeah, this is a prediction of judgment on Babylon, but it's also a prediction of the end of the world. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without taking an a priori position that the language of the passing of heaven and earth must be literal, where would you get that position? Now, you see, here's something absolutely amazing. In Isaiah chapter 13, we have the prediction of the destruction of heaven and earth, right? But as you look at this text grammatically, you will notice that there are connective particles from verse to verse, not every single verse, but verse to verse, that connect the discussion into a united whole. There is no disjunctive text in chapter 13 in which the writer says, oh, this is at hand, that's not at hand. In fact, the text says, the day of the Lord against Babylon is at hand. And that day of the Lord is the destruction of heaven and earth. So what does Mr. Pope have to argue? He has to argue, well, the day of the Lord was not really at hand. Just the day of judgment against Babylon was at hand. That's not what the text says, however. It says the day of the Lord is at hand. Will Mr. Pope join the scoffers who say, oh, well, you know, God doesn't see time like we do. God doesn't communicate in time like we do. Well, as a matter of fact, he does try to take that position later in the book. When we get to that discussion, I'll refute that position. There is no validity to that argument. But I hope you can see that what Mr. Pope is doing is he is saying, on the one hand, yeah, Isaiah is about a coming destruction of Babylon. No question about it. But thrown in there without any, listen to me, without any textual justification. Again, there is no disjunctive text. There is no discordant text. There is no contrastive text. There is no text in Isaiah 13 that says, now I've been talking about the judgment of Babylon, but now I'm going to talk about the end of the world. Furthermore, I want you to notice the following. We have this destruction of heaven and earth in Isaiah 13, verse 10. But in Jeremiah, obviously written much later, in Jeremiah 51, which is a prediction of the impending destruction of Babylon. In other words, it's about what Isaiah was predicting. Well, so in Jeremiah chapter 51, instead of trying to quote from it, I'm going to go over there and notice that the entire chapter is about the destruction of Babylon. Jeremiah 51, verse 1, Behold, I raise up against Babylon and against those who dwell in Leb-Kamai a destroying wind. I will send winnowers to Babylon, who shall winnow her and empty her land, for in the day of doom they shall be against her all around. Well, here's the day of doom against Babylon. And it continues, Make the arrows bright. Gather the shields. The Lord has raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes. Oh, wait, that's what Isaiah 13:17 foretold. And he speaks about the Medes, and he says, when he, that is the Lord, utters his voice, there is a multitude of waters in the heavens. Wait a minute. This is the Lord uttering his voice for the destruction of Babylon. That sounds familiar. The Lord shall come with a shout. Verse 20, You are my battle axe and weapons of war, for with you I will break the nation in pieces. With you I will destroy kingdoms. With you I will break in pieces the horse and its riders. With you I will break in pieces the horse, or the chariot and its rider. With you I will break in pieces man and woman. And, to skip to verse 24, and I will repay Babylon and all the inhabitants of Chaldea and all the evil they have done in Zion in your sight, says the Lord. See, he's talking about the Medes up here as his instrument. Now watch. And there's so much more that I could take notice of. I will start with verse 47. Behold, the days are coming, I will bring judgment on the carved images of Babylon. Her whole land shall be ashamed. All her slain shall fall in her midst. Then the heavens and the earth and all that is in them shall sing joyously over Babylon. For the plunderer shall come to her from the north, says the Lord. And Babylon, or as Babylon has caused the slain of Israel to fall, so at Babylon the slain of all the earth shall fall. Now wait a minute. If you're going to take the language of universal judgment in Isaiah chapter 13 as destructive of a yet future judgment, then you're going to have to do the same in Jeremiah 51. As Babylon has caused the slain of Israel to fail, so at Babylon the slain of all the earth shall fall. See, it doesn't work, does it? This is a prediction of the destruction of Babylon. But what happens in that day? Well, in Isaiah chapter 13, in the destruction of Babylon, heaven and earth is destroyed. But in Jeremiah chapter 51, in the destruction of heaven and earth, or in the destruction of Babylon, heaven and earth rejoices. Well, wait a minute. Do we have a contradiction here? No, we don't. It is simply an understanding of the use of metaphoric, hyperbolic, apocalyptic language. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this this really is an abuse of hermeneutic. You'll just have to excuse me. Mr. Pope is imposing his presuppositional claim and view, oh, well, the Bible definitely predicts the end of time. So even though Isaiah 13, and oh, by the way, in Isaiah chapter 24, which interestingly enough, Mr. Pope applies to the end of the world. But wait a minute, Isaiah 24 is a prediction without any doubt whatsoever, as I will share with you next week, is without any doubt a time of a prediction of the destruction of Israel. It is not a prediction of literal, physical heaven and earth. Then, Mr. Pope cites Ezekiel 32, I will cover the heavens and make its stars dark. I will cover the sun with a cloud. The moon will not give its light. Isaiah chapter 34, all the host of heaven shall be dissolved. And in Nineveh, Nahum chapter 1, verse 5, the mountains quake before him, the hills melt, and the earth heaves at his presence. By the way, I think it's kind of interesting. It may not be on purpose. It may not be. But I think it's more than interesting that Mr. Pope conveniently leaves out some passages which speak of the Lord coming out of heaven, the heaven and earth being destroyed, dissolved, etc., and it refers to those as past events. Let me state that like this. In the Old Testament, we have passages in which the biblical writers look back on judgments of God against given nations and describes those past events as God coming out of heaven, treading on the earth, and the earth melting beneath his feet. I'll share that with you. In the meantime, folks, I'm out of time. Be sure to get a copy of my book, The End of the Law, Torah to Telos, The Passing of the Law of Moses. And remember the fantastic special we've got going on. We're calling a PPW special from today's date until all the way through the book of August. You order over $25 or more of material. Doesn't matter if it's books, doesn't matter if it's DVDs, doesn't matter if it's MP3s. You order over $25 of material. We will give you a 15% discount. Just go ahead and process the order. We will process the discount when we process the order. And we will pay shipping. That is a fantastic deal. Okay? That's why it can only last through August. So, be sure to order the book. Thank you so much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. I'll see you on Monday.